The judging started at 10 in the morning. 3 judges made their way down each row, spending about 10 minutes at each project. Daniel watched them approach, his heart pounding so hard he thought it might be visible through his borrowed shirt. They were all older, probably professors or researchers wearing lanyards that marked them as official judges. They looked bored already, and the day had barely started. When they reached his table, Daniel stood up straight and tried to smile. The first judge, a woman with glasses and a severe expression, barely glanced at his project before looking at her clipboard. The second judge, a heavy man in a suit that looked too warm for the room, picked up Daniel's information sheet and skimmed it quickly. The third judge, younger than the others with an attitude that suggested he had somewhere better to be, was already looking past Daniel's table to the next project. "So," the woman said, not looking up from her clipboard, "tell us what you've built here." Daniel launched into his presentation. He'd practiced it 100 times, explaining how his water purification system used a combination of mechanical filtration, activated carbon, and a clever arrangement of salvaged components to clean contaminated water. He talked about the problem he was trying to solve, the millions of people worldwide without access to clean drinking water, and how his design could provide a solution for less than $5 a month per family. The judges looked unimpressed. The woman in glasses interrupted him halfway through. "Where did you get this design?" she asked. There was something in her tone, something that made Daniel's stomach drop. "I designed it myself," he said. "I spent 6 months working on it." "Yourself," she repeated, her voice flat. She walked around the table, examining his project from different angles. "And where did you build this?" "In my school's storage room. My science teacher let me use the old equipment there." The heavy man picked up one of Daniel's calculation sheets. Daniel had filled pages with math, showing how he'd worked out the filtration rates and cost efficiency. The judge looked at it for about 5 seconds before putting it down. "This looks very crude," he said. "Professional water purification systems are quite sophisticated." "That's kind of the point," Daniel said, trying to keep his voice steady. "The sophisticated ones cost too much for the people who need them most. This is designed to be cheap and easy to build using materials people can find." The third judge finally spoke up. "Have you actually tested this with real contaminated water?" "Yes, sir. I collected samples from different sources and ran multiple tests. The results are in that folder." Daniel pointed to a battered manila folder containing his test results and data. The judge didn't pick it up. "And you're saying you designed and built all of this yourself?" the woman asked again. There was clear skepticism in her voice now. "No help from your parents? No engineers or professors helping you?" Daniel felt his face getting hot. "My father's dead. My mother works as a nurse's aide. She doesn't know anything about engineering. I did this myself using books from the library and articles I found online." The judges exchanged glances. Daniel couldn't read their expressions, but he knew they didn't believe him. Or worse, they believed him but didn't think a kid from his background could create something worthwhile. "Well," the woman said, making a note on her clipboard, "it's certainly an ambitious attempt. The execution is quite impractical, though. These exposed wires are a safety hazard. The whole thing looks unstable. And frankly, without proper laboratory testing and certification, there's no way to know if this actually works as you claim." "But I have the test results," Daniel said, his voice coming out smaller than he intended. "Test results you conducted yourself," the heavy man said. "That's not the same as independent verification." He was already turning toward the next table. The younger judge hadn't asked a single meaningful question. He'd spent most of the time looking at his phone. They spent maybe 7 minutes total at Daniel's table. 7 minutes for 6 months of work. As they walked away, Daniel heard the woman say something to the other judges. He couldn't make out the words, but their tone was dismissive. He watched them stop at the robotics project next to his and immediately become more engaged, asking detailed questions and actually looking interested. The rest of the day was torture. Daniel stood next to his project while crowds of parents and students walked by. Some stopped to look, but most kept moving. He saw their eyes pass over his crude setup and move on to something shinier. A few people asked questions, and Daniel did his best to explain his work enthusiastically, but he could feel their pity. They saw a poor kid with a junk pile trying to play scientist. Other students from his school were there with their projects scattered throughout the convention center. Daniel saw them from a distance but didn't go over to talk. He felt like a fraud. What had he been thinking, entering a competition like this? That his garbage project would somehow impress people? That judges would look past the duct tape and zip ties to see the actual innovation? By early afternoon, the winners started being announced. Daniel already knew he hadn't won anything. He could feel it in the way the judges had looked at him, in the brief amount of time they'd spent at his table. Still, he stood there listening as they called out names and projects. First place went to a project on renewable energy that had clearly cost thousands of dollars to build. Second place went to the robotics team. Third place went to something involving nanotechnology that Daniel didn't fully understand. They announced special recognition awards, honorable mentions, category winners. Daniel's name wasn't called once. Not once. When it was finally over, Daniel started packing up his project. His hands were shaking and he was fighting hard to keep tears from falling. He wouldn't cry here, not in front of all these people. Mr. Harrison came over to help him load everything onto the cart. "I'm sorry," Mr. Harrison said quietly. "They should have given you more consideration." Daniel didn't trust himself to speak. He just nodded and kept packing. They loaded everything back into Mr. Harrison's car in silence. The drive back to school felt like it took hours. Daniel stared out the window, watching the buildings pass by, feeling like the world's biggest idiot. He'd wasted 6 months. 6 months he could have spent getting a job to help his mother. 6 months he could have used to actually study for his classes instead of obsessing over this stupid project. When they got back to the school, Mr. Harrison helped him carry everything back to the storage room. The device that had seemed so promising that morning now just looked like trash. Broken electronics and exposed wires held together with hope that hadn't been enough. "What you built is important, Daniel," Mr. Harrison said. "Those judges didn't see it, but that doesn't mean it isn't true." Daniel wanted to believe him, but all he could see was the disappointment on the judges' faces. The way they'd questioned whether he'd really built it himself. The way they'd dismissed his test results. The way they'd spent less time at his table than at any other project in the room. That night, he told his mother what happened. She was exhausted from a double shift, but she listened to everything. When he finished, she put her hand on his face the way she used to when he was little. "Those judges," she said in Spanish, "they looked at you and saw what you don't have. They didn't see what you do have. They didn't see the intelligence or the hard work or the heart. That's their loss, not yours." Daniel wanted to believe her. But belief was hard to hold on to when every piece of evidence pointed the other way. He lay in bed that night listening to the washing machines humming below his room. For 6 months he'd allowed himself to dream, to believe that maybe, just maybe, his project could be the thing that changed his life, that someone would see what he'd built and recognize its potential, that someone would see him, really see him and understand what he was capable of. But nobody had seen it. They'd looked right at him and his project and seen nothing worth their time. He was just a poor kid with a crude prototype and big dreams that didn't match his reality. The world had made it very clear where he belonged, and it wasn't in rooms full of expensive science projects and important judges. 3 weeks passed. Daniel went through the motions at school but couldn't bring himself to go back to the storage room. His water purification system sat in the corner, covered with a dusty tarp, a monument to wasted time and crushed dreams. He threw himself into his regular classes, determined to at least graduate with decent grades. Maybe that's all he'd ever been meant to do anyway. Get through high school, get a job, help his mother pay bills. Dreams were expensive luxuries he couldn't afford. It was a Tuesday morning, third period, when everything changed. Daniel was sitting in English class, half listening to a discussion about symbolism in some novel he hadn't finished reading. His mind was somewhere else, like it usually was these days. The intercom crackled to life and the principal's voice filled the classroom. "Daniel Torres, please report to the principal's office immediately." The entire class turned to look at him. Someone in the back made a low ooh sound like he was in trouble. Daniel's stomach dropped. He couldn't think of anything he'd done wrong, but principals didn't usually call kids to the office for good reasons. He gathered his books, aware of everyone watching him, and made the long walk down the empty hallway. Principal Hernandez's office was at the end of the main corridor. Daniel had only been there once before during freshman orientation. The secretary told him to go right in. When he opened the door, Principal Hernandez looked up from her desk with an expression Daniel couldn't read. She looked confused, maybe a little shocked, but not angry. "Sit down, Daniel," she said. Her voice was strange, careful. "I need to ask you something." Have you ever heard of MIT? Of course he'd heard of MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, one of the best schools in the world, the kind of place that existed in a completely different universe from his life. Yes, ma'am, he said. Good, because they're on the phone right now. They want to talk to you. Daniel stared at her. What? I'm as confused as you are, Principal Hernandez admitted. She gestured to her phone. There's a professor from their engineering department on the line. She says she needs to speak with you urgently. Her name is Dr. Morrison. This had to be a mistake, or a prank. Someone was messing with him. But Principal Hernandez looked completely serious. She pressed a button on her phone console. Dr. Morrison, I have Daniel here with me now. A woman's voice came through the speaker, professional but excited. Daniel, is this Daniel Torres? Yes, ma'am, Daniel managed to say. Daniel, my name is Rebecca Morrison. I'm a professor of mechanical engineering at MIT. I know this call must seem very strange, but I need to ask you about a project you entered in a regional science fair about 3 weeks ago. A water purification system? Daniel's mouth went dry. How did someone at MIT know about his project? Yes, that was mine. How did you? One of our graduate students was volunteering as a fair monitor that day, Dr. Morrison explained. He has a habit of photographing interesting projects for his own reference. He took several photos of your design, and when he got back to campus, he showed them to me. Daniel, I need you to understand something. What you built, the approach you took to the filtration problem, it's remarkable. Daniel couldn't process what he was hearing. But the judges, they said it was crude, impractical. The judges were wrong. Dr. Morrison's voice was firm. I've been sharing your design with my team here at MIT. We've been working on cost-effective water purification for 2 years, trying to develop something that could be manufactured and distributed in developing countries. The problem we keep running into is cost. Every solution we design ends up requiring expensive materials or complex manufacturing processes that defeat the purpose. But your design, Daniel, you've solved problems we've been struggling with. I don't understand, Daniel said. He looked at Principal Hernandez, who looked just as shocked as he felt. Can you tell me exactly how you designed the filtration sequence? Dr. Morrison asked. Specifically, the arrangement of your carbon filter and the way you've channeled the water flow. For the next 20 minutes, Daniel explained his design to a professor from MIT. He talked about the physics behind his filtration approach, the math he'd used to calculate efficiency, and the materials he'd chosen and why. Dr. Morrison asked detailed questions, real questions, not the dismissive ones the judges had asked. She wanted to know about his testing methodology, his failure rate, his cost calculations. She listened to his answers like they mattered. How much formal training have you had in fluid dynamics? She asked. None, Daniel admitted. I learned from textbooks at the library. There was a pause on the line. You taught yourself fluid dynamics from library books? And some online resources. Academic papers mostly. Free ones I could access, another pause. Daniel, I need to be very direct with you. What you've accomplished here is extraordinary. Not just the design itself, but the fact that you identified a real-world problem, educated yourself on the relevant principles, and created a working solution with essentially no resources. That's not just engineering. That's innovation. Daniel felt like he might pass out. This wasn't real. Things like this didn't happen to kids like him. I'd like to arrange a video conference with my entire research team, Dr. Morrison continued. Would you be available this Thursday afternoon? We're all very eager to hear more about your work. And Daniel, I want you to start thinking about something. Have you considered where you want to go to college? College. Daniel had been so focused on just getting through high school that college seemed like a distant dream, something for other people. I haven't really thought about it, he said quietly. Well, I think you should start thinking about it. I think you should think about it very seriously. My team would be very interested in having you join us here at MIT. We have programs for exceptional students, full scholarships that cover everything. What you've shown us suggests you're exactly the kind of student we look for. Principal Hernandez was gripping her desk, her eyes wide. Daniel felt like the room was spinning. I need to go coordinate with my team, Dr. Morrison said. But Daniel, I want you to know something. What those judges at the science fair didn't see, what they failed to recognize, that was their failure, not yours. You've done something genuinely important here. We're going to make sure people understand that. After the call ended, Daniel sat in the principal's office in complete silence. Principal Hernandez looked at him like she'd never seen him before. Did that really just happen? Daniel finally asked. I think so, she said. She was smiling now, a huge smile. MIT just called my office looking for one of my students. That's a first. The news spread through the school faster than Daniel thought possible. By lunch, everyone seemed to know that MIT had called about his project. Kids who'd never spoken to him before were suddenly stopping him in the hallways. Teachers looked at him differently. Even the popular kids who used to ignore him were paying attention. Mr. Harrison found him after 6th period. The science teacher had tears in his eyes. I knew it, he said. I knew that project was special. I'm so proud of you, Daniel. That Thursday, Daniel sat in the school's computer lab for the video conference. Principal Hernandez had made sure he had the room to himself and that the internet connection was working properly. When Dr. Morrison's face appeared on screen, she was surrounded by other people, her research team. They were all looking at him with interest and respect. Expressions he wasn't used to seeing directed his way. For an hour, Daniel presented his project to some of the brightest minds in engineering. They asked him to walk them through every aspect of his design. They wanted to know about his decision-making process, the challenges he'd faced, the solutions he'd developed. Not once did anyone question whether he'd really done the work himself. They treated him like a colleague, like someone whose ideas mattered. When he finished, Dr. Morrison smiled at him through the screen. Daniel, my team and I have been discussing your work extensively over the past few days. We believe your design has real potential for addressing water quality issues in underserved communities around the world. We'd like to help you develop it further, and we'd very much like you to consider joining us here at MIT to continue this work. One of the other professors spoke up. We're prepared to offer you a full scholarship, Daniel. Room, board, tuition, everything. We have programs specifically designed to support students like you, students with exceptional talent who haven't had access to resources. Students like you. Usually when people said that, they meant poor kids who didn't belong. But this time it meant something different. It meant talented. It meant belonging. Later that week, a reporter from the local news station called. Someone had tipped them off about the MIT story. They wanted to do a piece on the local kid whose science fair project had caught the attention of one of the world's best universities. Daniel agreed, mostly because Mr. Harrison encouraged him to. The news segment aired on Saturday evening. Daniel watched it with his mother in their small living room. The reporter had done a good job explaining what his project did and why MIT was interested. They'd even gone to the science fair organizers for comment. The woman in charge, the same one who'd been so dismissive at the fair, gave a carefully worded statement about how they'd had many excellent projects that year and how they were thrilled that one of their participants was receiving recognition. They're trying to take credit now, his mother said in Spanish, shaking her head. The response to the news story was overwhelming. The science fair organizers called the school, offering Daniel a retroactive award, a special recognition for innovation. Some of the judges reached out with messages of support and encouragement, suddenly claiming they'd recognized his potential all along. Daniel turned down the retroactive award. He didn't need their validation anymore. He'd found something better, recognition from people who actually understood what he'd built and why it mattered. But the most meaningful response came from Dr. Morrison. She sent him a personal email that Daniel must have read 20 times. In it, she explained that the academic world was full of people who couldn't recognize talent when it didn't come in the expected package. She told him that his response to rejection, continuing to believe in his work even when others didn't, was a quality that would serve him well as a researcher and engineer. She also told him something that stuck with him. The best innovations often came from people who saw problems differently because they'd experienced them personally. You built something to help people who needed clean water because you understand what it's like to worry about basic resources, she wrote. That perspective is valuable. That connection to real human problems is what engineering should be about. Never lose that, no matter how far you go in your career. Applications for MIT were normally due by specific deadlines, but Dr. Morrison's department fast-tracked Daniel's admission. They wanted him there for the fall semester, just a few months away. The scholarship was comprehensive, covering everything from textbooks to travel expenses. They even arranged for a summer bridge program to help him prepare for the transition to college-level work. Daniel stood in the storage room one afternoon, looking at his water purification system. It didn't look any different than it had the day of the science fair. Same exposed wires, same salvaged parts, same duct tape holding it all together. But now people saw it differently. Now they saw what he'd always known was there, a genuine solution to a real problem. Mr. Harrison came to check on him. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Weird," Daniel admitted. "Good weird, but weird. A month ago everyone thought this was junk. Now MIT wants to help me develop it." "The project didn't change," Mr. Harrison pointed out. "Just who was looking at it." Daniel thought about that. It was true. His design had been just as innovative the day the judges dismissed it as it was the day MIT called. The only difference was who had taken the time to actually see it, to look past the crude exterior and understand the thinking behind it. What if MIT had never found out about it? Daniel asked. What if that graduate student hadn't taken those photos? Mr. Harrison smiled. Then you would have built something else. And eventually someone would have noticed. Talent like yours doesn't stay hidden forever. It might take longer for some people than others. Might require more persistence, but eventually, real innovation gets recognized. The weeks following the MIT announcement transformed Daniel's world in ways he couldn't have imagined. The local news story spread to regional outlets, then to national education blogs. Suddenly, everyone wanted to talk about the poor kid whose rejected science project had caught MIT's attention. Interview requests flooded the school's phone lines. Education advocates used his story as an example of how talent could be overlooked in underfunded schools. Social media posts about him went viral. It was overwhelming. Daniel had spent most of his life trying not to be noticed, and now everyone was looking at him. Some of the attention felt good. Messages of support came from students around the country who saw themselves in his story. Teachers reached out to share similar experiences with talented kids who didn't fit the expected mold. But some of it made him uncomfortable. He didn't want to be a symbol or a cause. He just wanted to build things. The science fair judges who had dismissed him were now scrambling. The woman with glasses, the one who'd questioned whether he'd really built the project himself, sent a formal letter through the school. In it, she explained that they'd had limited time at the fair and had been evaluating dozens of projects. She wrote about how they encouraged all students to continue pursuing their interests regardless of competition results. The letter never included the word apology, but the defensiveness was obvious. Daniel didn't respond. What could he say? The judges had made their assessment based on what they valued, and what they valued wasn't what he'd built. That was a them problem, not a his problem. Mr. Harrison wanted him to be angry about it, but Daniel found he mostly felt nothing. Their opinion of his work had already done its damage and had already been proven wrong. Anything else was just noise. What mattered more were the conversations with Dr. Morrison and her team. They scheduled regular video calls to discuss the development of his water purification system. They wanted to test it rigorously, to document its effectiveness with proper laboratory equipment and procedures. But they also wanted Daniel involved in every step of the process. This wasn't about them taking his idea and running with it. This was about collaboration, about teaching him how academic research worked. The design is yours, Dr. Morrison told him during one call. We're here to help you refine it and get it to the people who need it. But you're the lead on this project. You'll be listed as primary inventor on any patents that come from this. That's important. Your work deserves proper recognition. Patents. The word felt foreign. Daniel had built his device to solve a problem, not to make money or get famous. But Dr. Morrison explained that patents would protect the design and ensure it could be manufactured and distributed ethically. It was about making sure the technology reached people who needed it, rather than getting locked up in corporate ownership battles. The most surreal moment came when Daniel received a call from the organizers of the International Science and Engineering Fair. They'd heard about his story and wanted to invite him to present his project at their next competition. It was one of the most prestigious science fairs in the world, with participants from dozens of countries. The same project that couldn't win a ribbon at the regional fair was being invited to compete internationally. You don't have to go if you don't want to, Principal Hernandez told him when the invitation arrived. You've already proven everything you need to prove, but Daniel wanted to go. Not to win an award or prove the original judges wrong. He wanted to go because there would be other kids there like him. Kids who'd built amazing things against all odds. He wanted to meet them and see what they'd created. Competition mattered less to him now than connection. His mother was the one struggling most with all the changes. She was proud, fiercely proud, but also worried. "MIT is far away," she said one night in Spanish. They were sitting in their small kitchen, eating the rice and beans she'd made for dinner. "How will you manage there?" "They have support programs, Mama," Daniel assured her. "Financial aid, tutoring, counseling. Dr. Morrison said they're used to working with students from all kinds of backgrounds." "But you've never been away from home," she pressed. "You've never even left the state," that was true. Daniel had lived his entire life within a 20-mile radius. The idea of moving across the country to one of the most competitive universities in the world was terrifying, but it was also exciting in a way he'd never experienced before. For the first time in his life, he was moving towards something rather than just trying to survive. "I'm scared too," he admitted to his mother, "but I think that means it's worth doing." She reached across the table and took his hand. "Your father would be so proud. I wish he could see this." Daniel wished that too. He wished he could remember more about his father than the smell of his toolbox. But maybe his dad was seeing it somehow. Maybe that would have to be enough. The responses from other students at school varied wildly. Some were genuinely happy for him, especially the other kids who struggled financially or felt overlooked. They saw his success as proof that their circumstances didn't have to define their futures. But others resented it. There were whispers that he'd only gotten into MIT because of the publicity, that the university wanted the good PR of helping a poor kid. Some students who'd always had everything handed to them couldn't understand why Daniel's crude project mattered more than their expensive ones. Daniel tried not to let it bother him. He'd spent years being invisible at school. A few months of jealousy wouldn't kill him. Besides, he'd be gone soon enough. MIT's summer bridge program started in late June, which meant he had just a few weeks left in his old life. Mr. Harrison organized a small celebration in the science classroom. Just a few students who'd been in advanced science courses, plus the principal and some teachers. They'd pooled money to buy Daniel a scientific calculator, a really good one that cost more than Daniel had ever spent on anything for himself. The card attached to it was signed by everyone, full of messages about how he'd inspired them. "You showed us that innovation isn't about having the best equipment or the most funding," Mr. Harrison said during the celebration. "It's about seeing problems clearly and thinking creatively about solutions. That's a lesson our students needed to learn." One of the students, a quiet girl named Amy who'd always been nice to Daniel, asked him what advice he'd give to someone who wanted to pursue engineering but didn't have resources. Daniel thought about it carefully. "Find the people who believe in you," he said finally. Mr. Harrison believed in me and gave me access to that storage room. My mom believed in me even when I wanted to give up. The librarian believed in me and saved books for me. You can't do everything alone, but you don't need everyone to believe in you. Just a few good people who see your potential and are willing to help. The week before he left for MIT's summer program, Daniel went back to the junkyard where he'd salvaged most of his parts. Tommy, the owner, was sorting through a pile of old electronics when Daniel arrived. "Heard you're heading off to fancy college," Tommy said, not looking up from his work. "MIT," Daniel confirmed. "I wanted to thank you for letting me take parts from here. I couldn't have built anything without that." Tommy finally looked at him, squinting against the sun.
"You know how much stuff people throw away?"
"Perfectly good things that just need a little fixing or a different purpose. Most people look at this place and see garbage. You looked at it and saw possibilities. That's why you're going to do well, kid. Not because you're going to MIT, but because you already know how to see potential where others see nothing." Daniel helped Tommy sort electronics for a couple hours, talking about his plans and listening to the old man's stories about other people who'd found useful things in his junkyard over the years. It felt important to spend time here, in the place where his project had really begun. The components had come from this junkyard, but so had the lesson that value wasn't about price tags or polish. It was about function and purpose. On his last day at school, Daniel cleaned out his locker and packed up the few personal items he'd kept in the storage room. His water purification system was being carefully packed up to ship to MIT's engineering department, where it would undergo proper testing and refinement. Looking at the empty space where it had sat for so long felt strange. That device had changed everything. Principal Hernandez called him into her office one more time. "I'll be honest with you, Daniel," she said. "Before MIT called, I didn't know who you were. I'm embarrassed about that. We have a lot of students, but that's no excuse. You were here doing exceptional work and I never noticed. It's okay, Daniel said, and he meant it. No, it's not okay, she insisted. But it's going to change. We're implementing new programs to identify and support talented students who might be flying under the radar. We're setting up a makerspace with donated equipment where kids can work on projects. You've inspired something here, Daniel. You've reminded us what's possible when students have support and opportunity. That felt like the best outcome of everything, not just his own success, but the possibility that other students might have an easier path than he'd had. That mattered more than awards or recognition. His mother helped him pack for MIT. He didn't have much to bring. Clothes that mostly didn't fit quite right, some books, his father's toolbox. Everything fit in 2 suitcases and a backpack. Looking at his packed bags, evidence of his entire life condensed into such a small space, Daniel felt the weight of what was happening. You're going to do amazing things, his mother told him. She was crying, had been crying on and off all week. But promise me you'll remember where you came from. Promise me you'll stay who you are. I promise, Mama, he said, hugging her tight. The night before he left, Daniel couldn't sleep. He lay in his small bedroom, listening to the washing machines humming below, a sound that had been the constant background of his entire life. Tomorrow he'd be on a plane for the first time, flying to a different coast to attend one of the world's best universities. Tomorrow his life would change completely. He thought about the judges at the science fair, the ones who'd looked at his project and seen nothing worth their time. He wondered if they ever thought about him now, if they regretted their quick dismissal. But mostly he thought about Dr. Morrison and her team, about how they'd looked at the exact same project and seen possibility. The difference hadn't been in what he'd built. The difference had been in who was looking. The campus looked nothing like anything Daniel had ever seen. Ancient brick buildings mixed with modern glass structures, all surrounded by perfectly maintained lawns. Students walked confidently between classes, talking about things he only partially understood. Everyone seemed to belong here except him. His 2 suitcases and backpack felt inadequate, compared to the moving trucks and multiple trips other freshmen were making from expensive cars. The summer bridge program was designed to help students like him transition to college-level work. There were about 30 students in the program, all from backgrounds that hadn't prepared them for the intensity of MIT's academics. Daniel met kids from rural areas with schools even worse than his. Kids from other countries who'd overcome incredible obstacles just to get here. Kids who'd taught themselves advanced mathematics because their schools didn't offer the courses they needed. For the first time in his life, Daniel wasn't the only one. These students understood what it meant to be brilliant but broke, talented but overlooked. They'd all fought their way here, and they all carried that same mix of excitement and terror about whether they truly belonged. Dr. Morrison met with him during his first week. Her office was filled with prototypes and papers, the organized chaos of someone deeply involved in active research. She welcomed him warmly, asked about his flight and his dorm room, then got straight to business. Your water purification system arrived safely, she told him. We've set it up in our main lab. I want to show you what we're working on, but first I want to hear from you. What do you want to accomplish here, Daniel, beyond just getting a degree? No professor had ever asked him that before. Teachers had asked what he wanted to study or what grades he hoped to achieve, but nobody had asked about his bigger purpose. I want to build things that help people, Daniel said. Real people who are struggling. I don't want to spend my life making expensive technology for people who can already afford everything. I want to solve problems that matter. Dr. Morrison smiled. Then you're in the right place. Come with me. I want to show you something. She led him through several buildings to the engineering lab where his device sat on a pristine workbench, looking even more crude and improvised in this environment of sophisticated equipment. But surrounding it were computer models, test results, and design iterations. Her team had been working. We've run comprehensive tests, Dr. Morrison explained. Your core design is even more efficient than you calculated. The way you arranged the filtration sequence, it's actually optimal for the materials you used. We've been trying to figure out how you arrived at that configuration. Trial and error, mostly, Daniel admitted. I tried about a dozen different arrangements before I found one that worked consistently. That's exactly how good engineering happens, Dr. Morrison said. Theory gives you possibilities, but experimentation tells you what actually works. Your instincts were excellent. She showed him the next steps. They were developing a refined version of his design that could be manufactured more consistently while maintaining the low cost. They'd identified 3 developing countries where pilot programs could test the system in real-world conditions, and they were documenting everything carefully for academic publication. "You'll be lead author on the papers," Dr. Morrison told him. "This is your innovation. We're just helping you develop it properly." Over the next few months, Daniel discovered what it meant to be a student at MIT. The work was brutal. Classes that assumed a level of preparation he didn't have. Problem sets that took him twice as long as other students. Study sessions where he felt constantly behind. But he also discovered that everyone struggled. Even the kids who'd gone to prestigious prep schools found MIT challenging. The difference was that Daniel was used to working harder than everyone else. That skill served him well. His water purification project continued developing. By October, the first pilot program was ready to launch in a rural community in Kenya. Dr. Morrison arranged for Daniel to present at a United Nations conference on sustainable technology, explaining his design to policymakers and development workers from around the world. Standing on that stage, describing how his device could provide clean water to families for less than $5 a month, Daniel understood that his project had grown far beyond a science fair entry, but he never forgot the rejection. Every time someone praised his work or expressed amazement at what he'd built, Daniel remembered those 7 minutes at the science fair. The dismissive judges, the barely concealed doubt, the quick move to the next table. That memory kept him grounded. It reminded him that validation from authorities wasn't what made work valuable. Impact was what mattered. The weekends became sacred time for Daniel. While other students partied or explored Boston, he set up video calls with students from his old high school. Mr. Harrison had started an engineering club, and Daniel mentored them remotely. He reviewed their project ideas, helped them troubleshoot problems, and shared what he was learning at MIT. These calls felt more important than any grade he received. "You're giving back," Dr. Morrison observed when she learned about his mentoring. "That's rare in students your age. Most are focused purely on their own advancement." "I had help when I needed it," Daniel said simply. "Mr. Harrison, the librarian, my mom, you. If nobody had helped me, I wouldn't be here. It seems wrong not to help others." In November, something unexpected happened. Daniel received an email from one of the judges from the science fair, the heavy man in the suit. The message was long and thoughtful. He explained that he'd been thinking about Daniel's project often since the news coverage. He admitted that he'd judged it based on appearance rather than merit, that he'd let his assumptions about what successful projects should look like blind him to actual innovation. He apologized for not giving Daniel's work the consideration it deserved. Daniel sat with that email for a long time before responding. Part of him wanted to be angry, to point out how much damage quick judgments could do. But mostly he felt tired of carrying that anger. The judge's apology couldn't change what had happened, but it showed growth. That counted for something. He wrote back a short message thanking the judge for reaching out and explaining that the experience, while painful, had taught him valuable lessons about perseverance and staying true to his vision regardless of others' opinions. He meant it. As much as that rejection had hurt, it had also strengthened something in him. It had taught him not to need external validation to believe in his work. The semester moved quickly. Daniel's grades were solid, though not exceptional. He was learning that being smart wasn't enough at MIT. Everyone here was smart. Success required discipline, collaboration, and the ability to learn from failure. Those were skills he was developing, sometimes painfully. The winter break was bittersweet. Going home to the apartment above the laundromat felt strange. The space seemed smaller than he remembered, but his mother's cooking tasted exactly the same, and the washing machines still hummed the same familiar rhythm. He'd changed, but this place hadn't. There was comfort in that. His old friends barely knew how to talk to him. The ones who'd ignored him before suddenly wanted to hear about MIT. The ones who'd been genuine friends felt distant, like they lived in different worlds now. Daniel realized with some sadness that he was already separating from the place he'd grown up. That was the price of moving forward. But Mr. Harrison was the same. Daniel spent hours in the old storage room with him, now renovated into a proper makerspace. Students were working on projects with real equipment, donated by local businesses inspired by Daniel's story. Seeing kids hunched over workbenches pursuing their own innovations felt like watching his own past replay with better resources. "You've inspired something here," Mr. Harrison told him. "These kids see what's possible. They see that where you start doesn't determine where you end up." Back at MIT for the spring semester, Daniel's project reached a major milestone. The Kenya pilot program results came back. The water purification systems were working. Families had access to clean water for the first time in years. The cost per family was even lower than Daniel had calculated, less than $4 a month. Children were getting sick less often. The data was clear and powerful. Dr. Morrison invited Daniel to co-present the results at a major engineering conference. Standing on that stage, showing photographs of families using systems based on his design, Daniel felt something shift inside him. This was real. This wasn't about awards or recognition or proving anyone wrong. This was about clean water reaching people who needed it. This was about solving actual problems. A reporter from a science magazine interviewed him after the presentation. She asked the question everyone seemed to ask eventually. Did he feel vindicated after being rejected at the science fair? Daniel took a moment to really think about his answer. "I'm grateful for the rejection," he said finally. "It taught me that innovation isn't validated by ribbons or judges' opinions. It's validated by whether it solves real problems for real people. Those judges didn't see the value in my work, but the people who needed clean water would have seen it immediately. That's the only validation that ever mattered." The reporter scribbled notes. "That's a mature perspective for someone your age." "When you grow up without much," Daniel said, "you learn early what actually matters. It's not about looking impressive. It's about being useful." By the end of his freshman year, Daniel had established himself at MIT not as the poor kid with the inspiring story, but as a serious engineering student with a talent for practical problem solving. His grades had improved as he'd adapted to the workload. His water purification project had expanded to pilot programs in 3 countries. He'd been invited to join advanced research labs as a sophomore, and he'd helped establish a mentorship program connecting MIT students with talented kids from underfunded schools. Standing in his dorm room, packing to go home for the summer, Daniel thought about everything that had changed in the past year. He'd gone from a storage room in a struggling high school to the laboratories of MIT. He'd gone from being dismissed by science fair judges to presenting at international conferences. He'd gone from wondering if he belonged anywhere to knowing exactly what he wanted to accomplish with his life. His phone buzzed with a message from his mother. She was proud of him, she wrote in Spanish. His father would have been proud too. Daniel looked at his father's old toolbox sitting in the corner of his dorm room, still scratched and dented, still solid. He'd brought it with him across the country, a reminder of where he'd come from. The tools inside weren't sophisticated or expensive. They were basic, practical, the kind of tools you use to fix real problems. In a lot of ways, that toolbox represented everything Daniel believed about engineering. It wasn't about having the fanciest equipment or the most impressive credentials. It was about being willing to work, to learn, to solve problems that mattered. Daniel thought about the kids he was mentoring back home, the students working in Mr. Harrison's new makerspace. He thought about the families in Kenya using clean water from systems based on his design. He thought about Dr. Morrison and her team, who'd looked at a crude prototype and seen its true potential. And yes, he thought about the judges who'd dismissed his work in 7 minutes. But that last thought came without bitterness now. Those judges had taught him something valuable. They'd taught him that the world would often fail to recognize innovation when it came from unexpected places. They'd taught him that validation from authorities was nice but unnecessary. They'd taught him that rejection wasn't failure, it was information. Information about who understood what truly mattered and who didn't. As Daniel locked his dorm room and headed to catch his flight home, he knew exactly what he wanted his future to look like. He'd continue developing technologies that helped people who needed help. He'd mentor students who reminded him of his younger self. He'd prove over and over again that brilliance didn't require privilege. It just required curiosity, determination, and the courage to build something meaningful regardless of who was watching. The crude water purification system that judges had rejected was now saving lives across 3 continents. That was real validation. That was what mattered. And Daniel was just getting started.